The soft glow of my phone screen cut through the bedroom darkness at 1:22 a.m. I blinked, trying to make sense of the time, then saw it wasn't my phone at all. It was Philip's, lying face down on his nightstand, its light pulsing faintly from beneath. A text message. My eyes, still heavy with sleep, registered the name. Mom. Quick pause here. Let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments. My mother, Julia. Texting Philip at 1:22 in the morning. My first thought was a shrug. Maybe she'd had a nightmare. Maybe she'd forgotten the time. She was 60 after all, and sometimes her internal clock went a little haywire. Philip, my husband of 5 years, was 38 and a heavy sleeper. He didn't stir beside me. I rolled over, pulling the duvet tighter, and tried to go back to sleep. My name is Mackenzie, and at 36, I've spent most of my life trying to ignore the little red flags that pop up around Julia. It's easier that way. But then it happened again, 2 nights later. This time I was still awake, reading an article for a food writing gig. 12:57 a.m., the same faint glow from Philip's nightstand. Again, Mom. This time, the shrug felt forced. A tiny, cold knot began to form in my stomach. Julia was a lot. She'd always been a lot. My earliest memories of her were laced with a peculiar kind of criticism, delivered with a smile. "He's too good for you, Mackenzie," she'd say about a high school boyfriend, then later about Philip. "You never put enough effort in. Look at your hair." She'd make it sound like a loving concern, but the words always landed like tiny, poisoned darts. Over the years, those darts had chipped away at my confidence, leaving me with a persistent hum of self-doubt. Philip, bless his heart, was the kindest man I knew, a natural people-pleaser, almost to a fault. He'd always tried to smooth things over with Julia, to be the bridge between her sharp edges and my increasingly brittle patience. I'd always appreciated it, saw it as him protecting me. Now, I wasn't so sure. I pretended everything was normal. I made coffee, we talked about our days. I asked Philip about his work. He was a software engineer, methodical and predictable. Nothing seemed out of place, but the knot tightened. We had a shared iPad in the living room, a relic from when we first moved in together. We used it for recipes, streaming movies, sometimes checking shared calendars, and it synced iMessages. I waited until Philip left for work. My hands were a little shaky as I picked up the tablet. It felt like I was doing something wrong, invading his privacy, but the alternative, living with that cold knot of suspicion, felt worse. I navigated to the Messages app. My thumb hovered over Julia's contact. I took a deep breath. The conversation history wasn't long, but it was frequent, and it wasn't about nightmares. It was about money. My eyes scanned quickly, my heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There were vague references to expenses, bills, urgent needs. And then I saw it, stark and chilling, a message from Julia, time-stamped just hours after that first late-night text. "I need the money before Friday." She can't know. The message, "I need the money before Friday. She can't know," burned itself into my retinas. My breath hitched. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a secret that involved my husband and my mother. The cold knot in my stomach solidified into a hard, painful lump. I closed the Messages app on the iPad, placed it back on the coffee table, and walked away, trying to appear calm, trying to breathe normally. For the next few days, I moved through my life in a fog. I cooked, I wrote, I laughed at Philip's jokes, but my mind was a frantic supercomputer, running simulations, replaying every interaction. I didn't confront him. Not yet. The self-doubt that Julia had so carefully cultivated over decades whispered in my ear, "You're overreacting. You're imagining things. You're jealous." But the evidence on the iPad was too stark. Instead, I started my own quiet investigation. I waited until Philip was at work, or asleep, or in the shower. I'd pick up the iPad, or sometimes, when he left his laptop open, I'd check his browser history. It felt dirty, invasive, but the alternative was letting this fester, letting Julia's insidious influence continue to rot my marriage from the inside out. The messages weren't just recent. Scrolling back, I found them stretching for months, almost a year in fact. Regular requests, always around the same time of the month, always with an underlying urgency. Sometimes it was a vague medical bill, other times urgent utilities. Never a specific amount in the text, just the demand for the money. Then I found it, tucked away in Philip's cloud storage, a file I'd never noticed before, Household Budget, Q3. I clicked it open. It was an Excel spreadsheet, meticulously organized, as Philip always was. And there, under a category labeled Miscellaneous, were recurring entries. $2,200. Julia. Utilities, medical. Every single month, for the last 11 months, $2,200. My stomach lurched. That was a significant chunk of our disposable income. Money we talked about saving for a down payment on a bigger place, or for a long-delayed trip to Italy. My mother, Julia, was siphoning money from us, from Philip. The anger was a slow burn, but it was there. And then, a new layer of betrayal. In one of the older message threads, Julia had written, "I told my therapist about your support. She says it's good you're helping me through Mackenzie's emotional withdrawal. It's been so hard since she pulled away." My blood ran cold. Emotional withdrawal? She was telling Philip she was seeing a therapist, because I was emotionally withdrawing, and that was her trauma. It was a classic Julia move. Spin the narrative, make herself the victim, and use it to justify her demands. And Philip, my kind, conflict-avoidant Philip, had clearly bought it. He was a peacekeeper, always had been. He'd rather pay the money, endure the late-night texts, than face Julia's wrath or cause a family disruption. He was deceiving himself, believing he was helping, when he was just enabling. I needed to talk to someone. Someone who wasn't in the family. Someone who could see clearly. I called Freya. Freya Brown, my best friend since college, was a no-nonsense marketing manager in her early 30s, sharp as a tack and brutally honest. "She's doing what?" Freya's voice was a low growl through the phone. "Mackenzie, this isn't just mom being mom. This is financial abuse. And Philip, he's complicit." We talked for hours. I laid out everything, the late-night texts, the "she can't know," the Excel sheet, the therapist lie. Freya listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with a sharp question. "You can't just blow up," she advised. "She'll turn it around on you. You need proof, undeniable proof, and you need a plan." Her words resonated. This wasn't about a screaming match. This was about something deeper, something that had been festering for years. This was about liberation. Over the next few days, I meticulously transferred every single relevant message, every screenshot of the Excel sheet, every bank statement detail I could find, into a secure, encrypted folder on my personal cloud drive. It was a digital archive of betrayal. As I was cross-referencing one of the older message threads, a name popped up that stopped me cold. It wasn't Philip. It was another initial. Wait, why are there messages from Julia to someone labeled A? Wait. Why are there messages from Julia to someone labeled A? My finger hovered over the contact. A. It could only be one person, Annalise, my younger sister, 32 now, 4 years my junior. We hadn't spoken in years, not really. Not since she'd left for college, then barely looked back. Our relationship had always been complicated, strained by Julia's constant comparisons. Annalise, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was always too sensitive, too emotional. When Annalise had finally cut ties, it felt like she was cutting ties with the whole family, including me. I'd always wondered if she thought I was in on it, part of Julia's manipulative orbit. The messages to A were similar to Philip's, though less frequent and older. Requests for money, veiled threats about family reputation, hints of disappointment. My stomach twisted. Had Julia done this to her too? I needed to know. I found Annalise's old email address, the one she'd used before she went fully off-grid from the family. I crafted a careful message, vague enough not to give away my suspicions, but direct enough to pique her curiosity. Annalise, it's Mackenzie. I need to talk to you about Mom. Something important. Please, just meet me for coffee. No one else needs to know. I didn't expect a reply, but a day later, one popped up. Where and when? Short, to the point, just like Annalise. We met at a small, independent coffee shop tucked away on a side street, far from our usual haunts. I arrived first, nursing a lukewarm latte, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm. When Annalise walked in, she looked exactly the same, yet entirely different. Her fiery red hair was still a vibrant shock, but her eyes held a weariness I hadn't seen before. She was thinner, sharper, and there was a guardedness about her that made me realize how much time had truly passed. Mackenzie, she said, her voice flat as she slid into the seat opposite me. What's so urgent? I didn't waste time. Mom? She's been taking money from Philip, thousands a month, for almost a year. Annalise's eyes widened, then narrowed. Figures, she muttered, a bitter edge to her voice. She tried the same with me. My breath caught. She did? Yeah. Right after I graduated college. Said there were family debts from Dad's illness, that I needed to contribute to keep the house. Said if I didn't, she'd have to sell it, and we'd all be homeless. Guilted me into draining my savings. Every penny I'd earned from my part-time jobs. Her voice was low, laced with a resentment that had clearly simmered for years. Then, when I finally pushed back, when I said I couldn't afford to send her any more, she turned the whole family against me. Said I was selfish, ungrateful. Said I'd abandoned her when she needed me most. Said I was just like Dad, running away from my responsibilities. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was it. The confirmation. The shared story of manipulation, of Julia's insidious tactics. Annalise had been the golden child, but even golden children could be bled dry. I didn't know, I whispered, feeling a profound shame. I thought you just left. It was easier to leave than to fight her, Annalise said, her gaze fixed on her coffee cup. She makes you feel crazy, doesn't she? Like you're the problem. She told Philip she was seeing a therapist because of my emotional withdrawal, I confessed, the words tasting like ash. Annalise snorted. Classic Julia. She told me I was abandoning her, and that's why she was having panic attacks. She uses whatever she can to get what she wants. She tried the same with Greg, too. My eyebrows shot up. Greg, Annalise's husband, was a private man, incredibly supportive of Annalise, but I never imagined him getting caught in Julia's web. She tried to get money from Greg? Annalise nodded, a faint smirk playing on her lips. Oh, yeah. She called him up, spun him some story about a medical emergency and how she needed money for a procedure. Greg listened, then he told her, very calmly, that if she ever called him again asking for money, or if she ever tried to manipulate Annalise again, he'd call the police and report her for attempted fraud. Said he had all her calls recorded. She never called him again. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared silence, a quiet understanding. The awkwardness between us, built up over years of estrangement, began to crack, replaced by a fragile new connection, bonded by betrayal. Annalise, my fiery, resentful sister, had thought I was in on it. Now maybe she was starting to see. The coffee shop meeting with Annalise had been a revelation. It wasn't just Philip. It wasn't just me. Julia's web of manipulation extended far wider than I'd ever imagined. The anger I'd felt earlier, a slow, simmering burn, now ignited into a focused, determined flame. Freya's words echoed in my head. You need proof. Undeniable proof. And you need a plan. My plan began to take shape over the next few days. It needed to be public, undeniable, and impossible for Julia to spin. It needed to expose her for what she was, not just to Philip and me, but to the wider family, and it needed to happen on my terms. I decided on a family lunch, the pretense, an early anniversary celebration for Philip and me. Our actual anniversary was still a few months off, but it was a plausible enough reason to gather everyone. Philip, of course, was delighted. He loved family gatherings, saw them as a chance to smooth over any lingering tensions, to play the dutiful son-in-law. He had no idea what was coming. I sent out the invitations. Julia, naturally, was the first on the list. Then Philip's parents, though they were out of town and couldn't make it, which was fine by me. I needed the focus to be on Julia. Then Mara Harding, my cousin, was in her late 30s, just a couple of years older than me. She was the family gossip, the one who knew everyone's business. And crucially, she had a notoriously unstable relationship with Julia. Julia loved to confide in Mara, to spin her tales of woe and victimhood, knowing Mara would spread them like wildfire. Mara would be an unwitting but essential witness. And then, the secret guest, Annalise. I called her a few days after our coffee meeting. I'm planning a lunch, I told her, my voice steady. I want you there, for Mom's benefit. There was a long pause. What are you planning, Mackenzie? She asked, her voice cautious. Justice, I replied. And I need you as a witness, and a participant, if you're willing. Another pause, then a sigh. Okay, count me in, but I'm bringing Greg. For moral support, and because he's got a few things to say to her, too. Perfect, I said. Greg Ford, Annalise's husband, was a quiet, imposing presence. His presence would add an undeniable weight to the proceedings. The day of the lunch arrived. I'd booked a private room at a mid-range Italian restaurant, somewhere familiar enough not to raise suspicion, but public enough to feel formal. I arrived early with Philip, fussing over the table settings, making sure everything looked innocent. Philip, oblivious, helped me arrange the flowers. He truly was a good man, just blind, or maybe willfully blind. Julia arrived, dressed impeccably, a charming smile plastered on her face. She hugged Philip tightly, then gave me a perfunctory squeeze. Darling, so sweet of you to do this for your anniversary, she cooed, her eyes already scanning the room, assessing who else was there. Mara arrived next, a whirlwind of bright colors and nervous energy. She hugged me, then Julia, her eyes darting between us. She was already sensing something was off. Finally, Annalise and Greg walked in. The air in the room thickened. Julia's smile faltered, replaced by a look of shocked disbelief. Annalise, the prodigal daughter, the one who had dared to defy her, was here. And she was with Greg, the man who had threatened to call the police. Annalise, Julia said, her voice a strained whisper. Annalise gave her a tight, polite nod. Hello, Mom. We all took our seats around the large, round table. Philip, Julia, Mara, Annalise, Greg, and me. The atmosphere was a fragile truce, a thin veneer of civility stretched over years of unspoken resentments. Julia, ever the performer, cleared her throat, ready to take center stage. "Well," she began, her voice regaining its usual theatrical lilt, "before we start, I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to be here, celebrating Mackenzie and Philip's—" "Actually, Mom," I interrupted, my voice calm, cutting through her practiced monologue. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. "Before we do anything, I have something for everyone." I reached under the table and pulled out a stack of custom-printed folders. One for Philip, one for Julia, one for Mara, one for Annalise, and one for Greg. Each folder was crisp, professional, and contained a carefully curated selection of screenshots: the late-night texts, the Excel entries, the messages to Annalise, the therapist lie, all dated, all undeniable. I handed them out one by one. Philip looked confused, then curious. Mara's eyes widened as she took hers. Annalise and Greg exchanged a knowing glance. And Julia's hand trembled as she took the folder. Her eyes flickered from my face to the folder, then back again. She didn't even open it fully. Just the first page, where the words, "I need the money before Friday. She can't know," were clearly visible, followed by the "Julia, utilities or medical" Excel entry. Her face drained of color. Her lips started to tremble. Before anyone could read more than 3 texts, Julia let out a strangled sob, a theatrical, gasping sound that was meant to elicit sympathy, to derail the proceedings. She clutched the folder to her chest, her shoulders shaking. Annalise leaned in, her voice cutting through the sudden silence, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "You don't get to cry yet." Julia's sob echoed in the private dining room, a performance honed over decades. Her shoulders shook, her face buried in her hands, the folder with its damning evidence clutched to her chest. It was a classic move. Play the victim, deflect, gain sympathy. But this time, the audience wasn't buying it. "You don't get to cry yet." Annalise's voice cut through the silence, sharp and clear. She wasn't whispering anymore. "Not when you've been doing this for years." Philip, who had finally opened his folder, looked up, his face pale, eyes wide with dawning horror. He looked from the documents to Julia, then to me, a silent plea for explanation. Julia lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed, but a flicker of her usual manipulative fire still burned within them. "This is a lie," she wailed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Mackenzie, what is this? Why are you doing this to your own mother?" She turned to Philip, her voice shifting to a wounded maternal tone. "Philip, darling, don't believe her. She's unstable. I was just trying to protect you from Mackenzie's depression and laziness. She never puts effort in, you know. I was worried about you, about your finances, about her emotional withdrawal." Well, the words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd anticipated them. The familiar sting of her belittlement, the gaslighting, the twisting of reality. My emotional withdrawal, my laziness. Before I could even formulate a response, Mara, who had been silently flipping through her folder, gasped. Her eyes, usually full of mischievous gossip, were now wide with genuine shock and fury. "Protect him," she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at Julia. "You told me she stole from you. You said Mackenzie was stealing your pension, that she was irresponsible with money, that she was making you destitute. You said she was trying to get you committed." The room fell silent again, save for Julia's ragged breathing. Her eyes darted from Mara to me, then to Annalise. Trapped. Mara's revelation was the bombshell I hadn't even fully anticipated. Julia hadn't just been manipulating Philip and Annalise. She'd been poisoning the well against me with other family members, creating a false narrative of my supposed villainy. It was a calculated, insidious campaign of character assassination. You told the same lies to multiple people, Mara continued, her voice rising in disbelief. You pitted us against each other. You said Annalise was a drug addict who needed money for rehab. You said Mackenzie was trying to ruin your life. Julia tried to speak, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of her own lies. Philip finally found his voice, a strained whisper. Mom, what is this? Why did you tell me Mackenzie was... I was scared. You said you'd tell Mackenzie everything. You made it sound like I was hiding something terrible. You said she'd leave me if she knew. His voice cracked with a mixture of confusion, shame, and betrayal. My anger, which had been simmering, erupted, not just at Julia, but at Philip too. You were scared? I spat, turning to him. You were scared? So you just kept giving her money? For a year? While she told you I was lazy and depressed and emotionally withdrawn? You believed her over me? Your wife? The hurt was raw, searing. He was a victim, yes, but he was also an enabler. He had chosen to believe her lies, to keep her secret, to betray my trust, all to avoid conflict. Julia, seeing her last line of defense crumble, suddenly pushed back her chair with a screech. I can't believe this. This is an ambush. You're all against me. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the folder, her eyes wild. I'm leaving. I don't need this. She made a move for the door, expecting, I suppose, for someone to follow, to beg her to stay, to apologize. But no one moved. Philip sat frozen, staring at the table. Mara was still reeling, her face a mask of disgust. Annalise and Greg watched her with cold, unwavering gazes. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by Julia's frantic footsteps. She reached the door, fumbled with the handle, and then she was gone. The door swung shut behind her with a soft click. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken truths. Philip finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine, filled with a desperate apology. I just shook my head, my heart aching. Then Greg, Annalise's husband, who had been quiet until now, stood up slowly. His presence filled the room. His voice was calm, deliberate, but it carried an undeniable weight. We weren't the only ones, he said, looking around the table, his gaze settling on me. Renee left your mom because of this. We weren't the only ones. Renee left your mom because of this. Greg's words hung in the air, a final, devastating blow. Renee, my father. He had died when I was in my early 20s, a quiet, withdrawn man in his last years. I'd always attributed his distance to his illness, to his general weariness. But now, a new, chilling possibility opened up. After Julia's dramatic exit, the remaining four of us sat in stunned silence for a moment. Philip looked utterly shattered, his face pale and drawn. Mara was still processing, her usual vivacity replaced by a quiet, horrified reflection. Annalise and Greg exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. Dad, I finally managed, my voice barely a whisper. What do you mean, Greg? Greg sat back down, his gaze steady. Annalise told me. Your dad, he found out about her taking money from his brother, your Uncle David. Julia had convinced David she needed money for your college tuition, even though your dad was paying for it. When Renee found out, he confronted her. It was a huge fight. He threatened to leave then and there. He said he couldn't live with her lies anymore. Annalise nodded, her eyes distant. I remember bits of it. Screaming. Dad packing a bag. He didn't actually leave, not then. But he changed after that. He just retreated. He stopped fighting. He looked terrified of her. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. My last birthday with my father. I was 16. He'd given me a small wrapped gift, a book I'd wanted. Julia had been there, hovering, her smile too wide. I remember Dad looking at her, a flicker of something in his eyes I couldn't name then. Fear. It was fear. He wasn't just withdrawn. He was walking on eggshells, just like Mara had described her own childhood. He hadn't left because he was sick or because he was tired. He had been trapped. The lunch ended quietly. Philip tried to apologize, stammering out explanations about how he just wanted to keep the peace, how he truly believed Julia was in distress. I listened, but the anger was still too fresh, too raw. "We'll talk later," I said, my voice flat. "A lot later." Over the next few weeks, the full weight of Julia's manipulation settled over me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the decades of gaslighting, the subtle erosion of my self-worth, the constant competition she'd fostered between Annalise and me. It was a generational trauma, a cycle of silence and shame that had permeated our family for far too long. I started therapy. I found Sophie Dunn, a family friend in her late 40s who was also a licensed therapist. She listened patiently as I unspooled 20 years of Julia's insidious influence. Sophie didn't offer quick fixes or platitudes. She helped me see the patterns, to understand how Julia operated, and more importantly, how I had internalized her narrative. She helped me realize that my goal wasn't just revenge, it was liberation. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, my own life. My relationship with Philip was strained. We talked, or rather, I talked, and he listened, his face etched with remorse. He confessed how Julia had always made him feel inadequate, how she'd hinted that I was too much for him, how he'd felt pressured to fix her problems to prove himself worthy. It was a pathetic excuse, but I could see the genuine fear in his eyes. He was a people pleaser, and Julia had expertly exploited that. I told him he was on probation, emotionally and financially. He needed to earn back my trust, and that meant setting firm boundaries, starting with Julia. Meanwhile, Julia wasn't quiet. My phone began to buzz with her calls, then voicemails. At first, they were tearful, pleading. "Mackenzie, how could you do this? I'm your mother. We're family." Then they turned angry, accusatory. "You'll regret turning on your own mother. You always come back. You need me. You'll see." One voicemail left late one night contained a chilling mix of both. Her voice, raw with fury, then suddenly dissolving into theatrical sobs. "You think you're so strong, but you're nothing without me. You'll be alone. You'll regret this, Mackenzie. You always come back." I listened to it, my finger hovering over the delete button. The old Mackenzie, the one riddled with self-doubt, would have crumbled. But the new Mackenzie, the one who had finally seen the truth, felt a cold resolve harden in her gut. I wasn't coming back. I was done playing nice. The voicemail, Julia's voice oscillating between furious threats and theatrical sobs, was the last straw. Sophie, my therapist, had helped me see that engaging with Julia, even to tell her off, was still giving her power. The only way to truly break free was to cut the cord. A few days later, a certified letter arrived at Julia's address. It was a cease and desist letter, drafted with the help of a lawyer Freya recommended. It was short, formal, and to the point. Any further contact with me or Philip, any attempts at financial solicitation, would result in legal action. It was a radical step, one I never thought I'd take against my own mother, but it felt like a necessary act of self-preservation. Julia, predictably, did not take it well. She tried to rally her usual flying monkeys, cousins, church friends, distant relatives she'd cultivated over the years with her tales of woe. She called them crying about my cruelty, my ingratitude, my abandonment. She painted herself as the victim, as always, but this time it didn't work. Mara, still simmering with indignation from the lunch, had been busy. She hadn't just been a witness, she'd been a catalyst. She'd quietly, meticulously posted all the receipts online, the screenshots of the texts, the Excel entries, the detailed accounts of Julia's financial manipulations of Annalise, and even the story of my father's quiet suffering. She didn't name names, but the context was clear enough for anyone in our extended family to understand. Mara, the family gossip, had turned her powers against the source of her own childhood pain. The effect was immediate and devastating. The family grapevine, usually Julia's most potent weapon, turned against her. Cousins who had always believed her story started asking questions. Church friends who had seen her as a pillar of the community began to distance themselves. The money, her primary currency of control, started to dry up. No more urgent medical bills from unsuspecting relatives. No more donations from sympathetic friends. Julia, who had always relied on others to fund her lifestyle and her emotional demands, was suddenly cut off. Socially ostracized, financially isolated, karma, indeed, had arrived, wearing a string of pearls. Philip, for his part, was trying. He'd blocked Julia's number, changed his bank account details, and started attending therapy sessions with Sophie, separately from me, to address his own people-pleasing tendencies and his fear of conflict. It was a long road, but he was walking it. With the $2,200 a month that Julia had been siphoning off, a new purpose emerged. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not in the petty sense. It was about redirecting that misused energy, that stolen potential, into something positive. I researched local nonprofits, eventually settling on one that provided legal aid and safe housing for women escaping toxic family situations, particularly those involving financial abuse. Every month, on the day the money would have gone to Julia, I made a direct deposit to the nonprofit. It felt like a cleansing, a reclamation. A few weeks after the dust settled, Annalise and I hosted a reunion dinner. Just us, Freya, Greg, and Philip. No Julia. It was quiet, almost peaceful. We talked, we laughed, we acknowledged the trauma, but we also celebrated the newfound freedom. The sister I had lost, I had found again. Later that night, after everyone had left, I sat alone, a sense of quiet triumph settling over me. I pulled out my phone. I had one last message to send, not to Philip, not to Annalise, but to the number I had blocked, the number I would never answer again. "You told me I was never good enough," I typed, the words flowing easily without a trace of the old fear or self-doubt. "Yet you needed me. I don't anymore." I pressed send. It was a message into the void, a final declaration of independence. The latest voicemail from Julia was a familiar symphony of chaos. One moment her voice was a high-pitched shriek, accusing me of being a heartless monster, destroying her life, ruining the family. The next, it dissolved into ragged sobs, pleading for forgiveness, for understanding, for me to just call your poor mother. It was the same script, just a different day. I listened, not with the old knot of dread, but with a detached curiosity, like observing a specimen under a microscope. This was her, stripped bare, her usual charm and cunning replaced by raw, desperate manipulation. When it ended, I didn't save it. I didn't even hesitate. I pressed delete. It was a goodbye ritual. The digital evidence was gone, but the lessons were etched deep. I walked over to my desk, where the printed transcripts of Julia's texts and the Excel spreadsheet still sat, a physical manifestation of the betrayal. I picked them up, ran my fingers over the stark black and white. These had been my proof, my weapon. Now they were just paper. I held them over the small ceramic bowl I used for burning sage, lit a corner, and watched the flames curl, devouring the words, turning them to ash. The smoke carried away the last vestiges of the secret, the shame, the fear. The peace that settled over me wasn't a sudden, blinding light. It was a quiet, steady hum. It had come at a cost, of course. The illusion of a loving, functional family was shattered. The mother I thought I had, even with all her flaws, was gone, replaced by the stark reality of a manipulator. There was a loneliness in that, a profound grief for what could have been. But with it came clarity, independence, and a power I hadn't known I possessed. My sister, Annalise, was back in my life, a fierce, loyal ally. We talked almost every day, sharing stories, laughing at old memories, building a new foundation on honesty and shared understanding. It was a bond forged in fire, stronger than anything Julia could ever break. Philip was still trying. He was still in therapy, still learning to untangle decades of people-pleasing and conflict avoidance. He'd stopped flinching when my phone buzzed, and he'd started speaking up even to his own parents when they made passive-aggressive comments about family matters. He was rebuilding trust, brick by painstaking brick. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. My freelance food writing had taken on a new depth. I was working on an article, something broader than just recipes. I finished it that afternoon, the words flowing easily, fueled by my own journey. I proofread it one last time, then pressed send to my editor. The title, Your Mother Isn't Always Your Friend. A few weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. A physical letter, a rarity these days. It was from a reader, someone who had stumbled upon my article. Your story, it read in shaky, handwritten script. It helped me leave my mom. I didn't know it was possible. Thank you. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about breaking cycles, about finding your voice, about helping others find theirs. I had won, not by tearing someone down, but by building myself up. My mom still calls every Friday. I don't answer, but I do donate $2,200 a month, just not to her,